Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Dose. I am your host, Michelle Harrell, and today I have the honor to talk with Jenna Kluwe. Jenna and I got to know each other because Jenna was running and operating the very first psilocybin center in Portland that opened in Oregon in 2023, and that's where I saw my first client, and multiple clients thereafter. And so we've known each other since the beginning of kind of this journey of trying to get our psychedelic practitioners, our psychedelic businesses off the ground. And it's just really exciting to welcome Jenna. And today, Jenna is going to be talking about everything to do with psilocybin and borderline personality disorder, which I am personally also fascinated and can't wait to hear more because I don't know that much about borderline personality disorder myself. And I, as a trained and licensed facilitator, I understood that folks, with that kind of, with those kind of challenges and mental health challenges that, maybe psilocybin wouldn't be right for them. So I'm so excited to learn that might not be the case and hear about Jenna's experience. So Jenna, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Maybe you want to introduce yourself a little bit to our audience. And then if you'd like to give us a little bit of, foundational understanding of what borderline personality disorder is, because I think a lot of people, we think we know, but I don't think we actually know.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I started my career as a counselor. I have my bachelor's in psychology and master's in counseling. And so for a little over 15 years, I held a counseling license where I specialized in borderline personality disorder and CPTSD. And then I got a little frustrated with the mental health system and retired from that practice and moved into integration coaching. And then when I was in school for my certificate for psychedelic integration coaching, I heard my teacher let us know that, borderline personality disorder is one of the mental health contraindications. And I'm like, wait a minute. I've been doing this with folks for a long time, kind of informally. And that's why I was in the school, because I wanted to have a little more formal education, but I'd already been really integrating this work with folks who just came to me and was like, I ate some acid or I took mushrooms this weekend and I really need to talk about it. Like, yes, you really do.
Yeah.
I myself have been a psychonaut since I was 17 years old. And I knew personally how much they'd helped me. And so it really became a passion at mixing those and then helping people with that. And it just started kind of coming and falling in my lap as a counselor. So then I moved into the coaching realm and heard this contraindication. I'm like, no, this helps people like a lot from my experience with this diagnosis. Because of course, everyone who was coming to me with that had borderline personality disorder,
right,
specialized in. So I really started speaking and advocating for that. So that's mainly what I do now is integration coaching and educating folks and speaking and advocating for folks with BPD to be able to be in this space because it is a very helpful medicine for folks with BPD with care and with a lot of safety protocols around it, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think neither of us are suggesting that people go out and just try this on their own for whatever your reason is. I always, recommend please do your research, understand the risks, and, find a trusted person that can sit with you. And if you have, complicated circumstances around your mental health, I would advise seeking out a trained practitioner. Yeah. So now that we have that kind of like out of the way, that little disclaimer, can you tell us a little bit about like what are the, what is borderline personality disorder? How does is it, genetic? Is it environmental and what are some of the symptoms and how would people know if, they might be suffering from that?
Sure. So I prefer to describe borderline from a standpoint of through the lens of dialectical behavior therapy.
Okay.
That's like the therapy that has been created that really does help this diagnosis, probably the best in my opinion. It was developed by Marshall Linehan back in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and it really came aboard in the later 90s, early 2000s. People really started using this practice. And she talks about two different things. One is the 5 types of dysregulation, and then also the biosocial theory is how people develop this. So starting with the 5 types of dysregulation, I think this covers there's 9 DSM symptoms of BPD. You have to have 7 of the 9 to qualify for a diagnosis. But because those can kind of be a little more confusing, I think it's easier to understand this disorder through the lens of the 5 types of dysregulation. So those are cognitive dysregulation. That is where all of these types of dysregulation too are on a spectrum. So like the lower end of the spectrum would be kind of a overall paranoid type thinking, like you walk into the room, people look at you and they're like, oh, they're thinking about it. They were just talking about me. So that kind of low level paranoia that is pretty constant for folks with this. But it can go all the way over the other end of hallucinating, depersonalization, and dissociation. And so that's why it gets that type of dysregulation gets a little more complicated and disruptive.
Sure. Yeah.
Then we have behavioral dysregulation. And that encompasses the behavioral impulsive type symptoms that folks with this have. It's anywhere from the self-harming behaviors, the impulsive behaviors that can look like bipolar disorder because they can look very manic. They're risky type behaviors that people talk about when they are also in mania. So the risky sexual behaviors or spending sprees, things like that.
Okay.
And then this also incorporates the suicidal behaviors and suicide attempts that folks with this disorder typically have. They also have chronic suicidal thoughts. Like it's like every day for folks with this diagnosis, typically.
Yeah.
And then you have the self dysregulation. This is an unstable sense of self. Well, really, it's like, and we all do this on some level, right? Like we put on a mask when we're in professional space versus when we're at home, kind of thing. But this is like a constant. I take off this mask, but I never know what's underneath this mask. I have no idea what that is. Like I've learned that in this setting, I put this mask on, and in this setting, I do this. But they don't really have a good.
Yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was going to say, I think you're right. I think a lot of people suffer from that. Just, that seems like a very common human trait that I hear from a lot of my clients as well.
Yeah, we do. So, but this is like a pervasive, like really unsure, not just unsure, but completely does not understand like who, if you were to describe them, like, or ask them to describe themselves, they'd give you like a generic, like I do this for work and I do like, I have these kind of friends or I listen to this kind of music, but like being able to think through like decision-making is really difficult because they're so unsure of themselves that they don't know how to like be in the world, make decisions and things like that.
Right. You lose sight of your inner compass, your that instinctual voice, because if you're not if you're not connecting to yourself and you're pretending all the time, it's very hard to connect with self. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. The fourth one is interpersonal dysregulation, and there's a book called I Love You, I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. Like that encompasses this type of dysregulation. It is a very pervasive, like black and white thing of like, I love you and now I hate you. I love you again, don't leave me. I hate you, get away from me. And a lot of people call this splitting, where they're everything's great with somebody and then like one thing happens and they just completely flip and like you're the worst person ever, and really kind of lash out in that way. This is also has a lot of fears of abandonment incorporated with this. So there's kind of there's a lot there. And then also there's this tendency for people to get put up on like a pedestal with folks with this diagnosis, like you're the greatest thing ever. But then when you fall off that pedestal, like you are dirt under my feet kind of thing. So it's really that black or white thinking with that.
So a lot of love bombing is what yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Until they decide that you are not worthy of that and you've done something and they're like, you're not.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, thank you for that. That helps me as well. I think it'll help our listeners to get a better picture of, what folks are dealing with that are coming to you with BPD. And does it stem from like childhood trauma, or are there different reasons why somebody might develop something like this?
Yeah. There is one more type of dysregulation. Did I get all five?
Oh, sorry.
No, I always forget one of them though. So I did self, behavior, interpersonal, thoughts.
You did cognitive, or is that thoughts?
Yeah. Cognitive. Yeah. Oh my goodness, I'm drawing a complete blank on it.
Well, that's okay.
I can come back to it.
It'll come to you in the middle of our conversation. You'll be like, oh, I remember.
But going back to what you asked just a minute ago was how it develops. Marsha Linehan talks about the biosocial theory, that there are actually both components. It's biological and it is environmental. So folks with BPD, she has shown in multiple studies now that the part of our brain that regulates emotions for these folks is actually smaller in their brain, and it's more sensitive to emotions. So they experience emotions. That's the third, or that's the fifth. Is emotional
okay. See, I knew it would come to you.
I knew it would. That's like the overarching part of this diagnosis, is it stems from this emotional dysregulation, and then the rest of the coping falls in, or the rest of the dysfunctions start to fall in underneath that. So folks born with this start at a very, very young age of like experiencing emotions about 100 times worse, not worse, more than what we do.
Right,
like
magnified.
Visceral feeling for them, like they feel emotions in their body. And then they have parents who maybe don't understand that, so they're like, "What are you? There's nothing to cry about here." So they start getting this messaging of like, "There's something wrong with me. I'm experiencing this thing that I'm not supposed to, but I can't turn it off. And so what's happening to me?" Right. So folks with parents who are very validating and say things like, "Oh, I understand that you are having this emotion. Let me help you work through that," and provide that kind of modeling around coping. Typically, they do not develop this diagnosis. But folks who have parents who, well-meaning, are like, this is not something to be upset about. Don't be upset. That gets that message in again at like 2 and younger, like sometimes pre-verbal, of like, there is something significantly wrong here and I'm supposed to shut this in. And so the coping then develops around trying to manage that emotion dysregulation thing.
Right. And that's when we start putting on different masks to please those within our circle, right? And we all do that. So I think that's that's fascinating. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's like a kind of repeated traumatic experience for them. So from my standpoint, I believe that BPD is just another expression of CPTSD. It's that chronic traumatization around their experience and invalidation that continues over their whole childhood, and then they step into adulthood just like traumatized.
Right. And like, I imagine similar to many adults who we don't always learn how to self-regulate. We don't we start to hear that messaging that there's something wrong with us, all the things, right? So this is just, of course, on a more extreme level, but okay, fascinating. So what are like some of the traditional methods of treatment? And I'm curious to hear, because I heard you say in the beginning, you got a little bit frustrated with the traditional medical system. So what are the options that, prior to psilocybin or psychedelics being an option, what are options that folks with BPD have today through a traditional medical system, and why are they frustrating, and why are you finding them not sufficient? I'm curious.
I love dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. That is probably, in my opinion, the most effective one, but it's still really hard to get people to commit to that type of therapy. First of all, it's a very intensive therapy when you're doing the traditional DBT. It's a 2-hour group a week, plus an hour therapy, plus phone coaching. So having that kind of a model is expensive, and you find it a lot. People doing that traditional support in that way. So So it has been a very difficult thing. And then, like I said, this is a newer type of therapy. So previous to this, there was just not a lot out there really.
Wow.
There is some IFS work being done around with BPD now that it helps, and there's some acceptance commitment therapy that can help too. So like strategies amongst those, but DBT kind of brings them all in, and it does, in a way, it doesn't call it parts work, but there's parts work that is done in DBT a little bit.
Okay.
There's definitely acceptance. DBT is all about working on the balance between acceptance and change, and working through that. So there's some things that help with other therapies too, but really I find DBT being the most beneficial one for folks. But again, that is expensive. It's a lot of work, and as like a private practitioner, it's easy to get burnout doing that and not having someone that can be a phone coach person, for example. When you have clients, like then you're on call all the time.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that really is, that level of support is really helpful in about the first year of treatment for folks. When they have that type of intensive support, I see a ton of progress with people.
Yeah. So then how are psychedelics helping folks to kind of break through, transform? I don't know what the right word you want to use is, but because I know how it helps other clients, which I imagine is very similar to BBT, is BPD, is that it helps you get unstuck. It helps us to kind of almost give your brain a break from the circular destructive thoughts that many people have, and the ability to kind of view yourself in third person almost, and from a distance, and view situations from a distance in order to gain new perspectives. Is that kind of the same way it works for BPD?
Pretty much. Yep. Yeah. And that's one of my big frustrations is like when you look at the studies and they talk about how the neuroplasticity really helps to break free of this rigidity that the brain's protective, really the brain is protecting the person with this rigid structure that they've developed from such a young age. But it's not a functional protection anymore.
Right.
And outside of that, invalidating environment. So that's one of the ways, is that this increase in neuroplasticity to really help get them unstuck and to start to be able to see other perspectives and help that rewiring work. A lot of DBT is behaviorism. It is doing the skills over and over and over again. And so when you have that neuroplasticity, it helps those skills really sink in quicker. And then again, the studies on emotion regulation and how it helps regulate the emotion, that part of our brain that regulates emotions, it helps that function better. It does not make sense to me why we're shutting down a diagnosis that its main diagnostic feature is emotion dysregulation.
I think I think there's a lot of misconception about what BPD is, at least from, I can speak for myself. I think people think it's similar to like schizophrenia, or like that, folks with something like BPD could destabilize them even further and cause them to have, like some kind of psychotic break. At least that was what I understood until now. So I'm so fascinated to know that you have been working with, this population of people and seeing good results. So do you want to share maybe some examples of folks you've seen, and how would you recommend, if there's folks out there that are suffering with BPD or don't know, but feel like they might have some of the symptoms, how should they go about thinking about doing any kind of psychedelic, and what are some of the risks, and what are some of the protocols or processes by which they should try to do this?
Yeah, good questions. Let me think. That was a lot of questions.
I know, sorry, I threw a lot.
No, it's okay. First, the risks are exactly that. With that cognitive dysregulation piece, it can exacerbate that, right? Like psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. So the risk is that some of these negative symptoms can be amplified. So making sure that the person has some really solid skills around that they can go back to. Like grounding skills, if we're concerned about the cognitive dysregulation part, like if people are dissociating daily, they're not ready yet. They need to build skills around how to bring them back into reality and not dissociate, because that is another coping mechanism of their brain, is like, oh, this emotion is too much, check out.
Right. Yeah.
So if they're doing that every day, it's like they're not ready for psychedelics. They need to be working on mindfulness skills and practicing being grounded in reality, and dealing with hard things without needing to dissociate.
Right. Okay.
So my biggest thing with folks is really understanding where they're at with their skill use, having some level of stability. That doesn't mean that they can't be thinking about suicide every day, because that is a common misperception with a lot of people, even with depression, in this industry of like, oh, they can't be having suicidal thoughts.
Right.
There's a difference between suicidal thoughts as like an invasive like thought, because the brain is used to like just die kind of thing, versus I am going to kill myself and this is how I'm going to do it, and I have one intention of doing this and carrying this plan out. That's different. Like, you don't want to be there and take psychedelic, but if you're having these intrusive, like, I just want to die kind of thoughts, that's not necessarily suicidal ideation. That is something to be concerned about, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's another part of this that I think scares folks with this diagnosis, is that the level of suicidality that folks with this diagnosis experience. Another thing, though, that is a big piece of this is that people with BPD typically have like the highest rate of suicide completion.
Wow.
About 10% is directly related to folks with BPD. And the behavioral dysregulation that includes the impulsivity, there's that too. So for me, when I work with people, I typically work with people for about 6 months of really getting to know their skill level, and making sure that they have things that regulate that impulsivity, that they have good skill sets around emotion regulation and being able to bring it back down. Some distress tolerance skills. These are all DBT skills, by the way. Stress tolerance, being able to tolerate and sit through the distress and not have to act on those impulses. And then mindfulness, and being able to be a little bit of that outside observer. And that's another way psychedelics help. It's been proven over and over again that it increases our mind's ability to be mindful and be that outside observer. And that is so helpful for folks with this diagnosis, to be able to sit back and see what their thoughts are before they act on them.
Yeah. So what I just heard you say is, if you're looking for a quick fix, this is not it. Sounds like, I think that's really important to know, is that there is this lead time of about 6 months, I heard you say, of, making sure that somebody's ready and doing this with, real presence of mind, and understanding the risks and understanding what tools you have available to you during this type of experience. I think that's so great. So, what kind of transformations are you seeing with clients who have, participated in either psilocybin or other psychedelics? And, what is kind of the immediate relief that they're seeing, and then the longer term? I'm curious.
It's really been on a spectrum. I've had some folks that have been like, I had like one person I think of, they started their work with me with the suicide date. Like, you've got till this date.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's tough. I'm impressed you took that on. That's tough.
That's a really regular presentation for folks with BPD, which is another thing that, makes people nervous to work with in situations. So that person came back after an experience and was like, it just flipped off. I don't have any anxiety. Everything's cool. Like, that was their message. And we integrated that for a long time, and they are pretty stable still. And that was years ago.
That's amazing.
And then I've had some people that it really took a while. That's an important piece that I always talk and prepare people around, is this concept of disintegration, is that you can really disintegrate into some worse functioning. Some people had an increase in their drug use afterwards, where they maybe had been sober for years, and like they went back to that coping mechanism after a psychedelic experience. But work through that, and that was shown to have a lot of revelations around why that process happened. And then that is better now. I had other things of, again, I mentioned earlier, like I believe this is CPTSD. So another part of my work was as a therapist, prolonged exposure therapy. And so I've had psychedelics help decide for us or give us some paths towards what to work on with that type of therapy, and open up. Like this is what we thought it was, but actually after the psychedelic experience was like, no, it was this, and I need to work on that. And that got worked on, and then no longer in therapy. And that person in particular had multiple diagnoses other than their BPD. It was also had eating disorders, pretty significant heroin addiction for a while, and some OCD tendencies. So there's really a big range of how I've seen this help people, and it can be long-term. Like there's a person that it took about a year of integration for things to really flip for that person.
Wow.
But it was a constant, like their journey had to do with basically watching themselves die over and over again for 6 hours. And then how that got integrated over the year was like, do you see how these behaviors are basically leading to your death? And do you really want that? Or does that just like the way that you sought escape for so long? And so after it really took us like over a year of integration to get through that, but then now really wonderfully functioning. I do stay in touch with several of my people after the fact, and or after we're done working together. This person also is just doing fantastically, but it can take a while. So I'm always very transparent that the integration is really key. It's going to take a lot of work, and so be ready.
And that, I mean, and that's no different regardless of why you come seeking something like this out, right? It sounds to me like, you know, the protocols and the way that you're working with these clients is the same as how we all work with our clients, but maybe just a little bit more extreme, right? A little bit longer, it might take a little longer, but gosh, I've had clients too that it takes them a year to fully integrate their experience. It took me, I'd say 3 years to fully integrate one of my experiences. And, you know, so I understand that. That makes sense to me. And it's not that different.
It's not. And that's kind of the whole thing of like, what do you mean these folks can't use this? Like, I understand why there are risks to it, but there's risks for everybody doing this, right?
True. Yeah. Yeah. No, this has been fascinating for me, eye-opening. And I often, you know, I've often wondered if somebody is having suicidal thoughts. To me, you know, I know that's for Oregon, that's a knockout question, right? A lot of times for folks who are seeking this treatment. I understand, you know, you need some kind of level of stability going into this, but I really appreciate that point of view that for some people, those suicidal thoughts could be daily, and it could be such a part of their routine coping mechanism that, you know, it doesn't mean they're really working towards committing suicide, but that they are having those invasive thoughts. It's just like us having that same invasive thought that, you know, I'm ugly or I'm fat or I'm, you know, we all have invasive thoughts that we have just become patterns in the way that we cope with certain emotions or certain triggers. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And I really appreciate that nuance. So thank you. Yeah. Gosh, well, what else do we want to say, or do you want to say, you know, this is, I think, such a great opportunity to help educate folks on BPD and the use of psilocybin for, you know, treating that. If folks wanted to seek this out or were interested in learning more, how do you suggest they go about, you know, contacting you or getting in touch, and what's the process?
So couple different ways. One, on my Instagram, my wonderful social media lady has put a Linktree thing in there. So my Linktree has all of the ways to get a hold of me on there, or just emailing me. But I think on the Linktree, there's a free consult. So that's what I start with everyone is a free consult, just to chat and see what we're doing or what people are looking for. I require a get to know you session with everybody. That's like a 3-hour session of just let's get to know each other and see if this is going to be a good fit. And then past that, we talk about the different, and then it's pretty much customized to however the person's needs are, for if it's a 6-month thing, or I shouldn't say I only work with people if they work with me for 6 months. If they have a therapist and they're pretty stable and I can see that, it might be more like 3 months of let's really prepare you how to use your DBT skills around the psychedelic experience and stuff like that. So it's still a longer term preparation, but it might be shorter if you have that kind of support already in your life. So that's one way. Just emailing me at interdimensionsintegration@gmail.com. And I'll get back to you.
And we'll be sure to share all your info in the notes too for this episode. But yeah, and also, your Instagram, I just wanted to say your Instagram handle is also at Interdimensions Integration, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And then I also do, for folks that are just like curious, if they are seeing a client and they aren't sure if they're ready, I do readiness assessments for folks. And that's like a 3-hour process where I have a 25 question inventory that I can rate people and give a report back. Like if they're ready, and if not, like these are the areas that they need to kind of strengthen in before they should work with psychedelics.
So that's awesome. Yeah, that's great to know for other practitioners out there who might have a client who they're not sure, right? Okay. Good to know. Thank you, Jenna. That's a great resource. Well, what else? I don't want to, cut you short. I want you to be able to share as much as possible, but I think like you answered a lot of my questions. So are there other aspects you'd like to share, or anything else you want to tell our audience about the work you do?
I think it's very smart for folks to, while I'm very loud and critical of people like disregarding this diagnosis and kind of like, no, I won't work with them. I do think that folks need to be pretty well informed with trauma to sit with folks with this diagnosis. And so if it does feel like this is a little out of my scope, I always, I can help find people if I'm busy and don't have that capability to work with another person at the time. But I don't want to, again, I want to say, yes, definitely these folks are helped tremendously with this medicine. And if you aren't capable or, not capable, but,
no, but I mean,
you should refer.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would not feel, trained enough to take on a client with BPD. I would definitely refer them to you. No, I appreciate that.
I have kind of some instinctual things that I just notice and see and know what to do. So like,
I think there are levels, right? And so I am very aware of where my capabilities stop, and I would definitely, encourage people to find a facilitator that if you have a very particular situation. I think there's so many of us out here and so many of us specializing in different things that that's the great news. There's a facilitator out there for everybody. And if I'm not the right fit, I can help you find somebody. And I think that what I found in these circles in this new industry is that many of us feel that way, and many of us are very happy to. Because, at the end of the day, my bottom line always is, if I don't feel safe, then my client doesn't feel safe. So the minute I have any kind of reservations or any kind of, questions about, am I able to really sit and help with this, sit with this person and help this person? Am I what they need? Then if I have any kind of question about that, I automatically help them find somebody else, because it's not going to work. Right. And we're not out here doing it for the money. So, I want every single client to find the healing that they're looking for. And so I think that's really important to say. So thank you. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jenna. This has been super informative for me. And I think it's going to hopefully, I don't know if there's any other podcasts out there talking about psilocybin use and BPD or psychedelics, but we may be the first. I don't know.
I really have a hard time finding stuff. There has been a few studies that are starting to happen more and more, but they're generalizing them some of them are generalizing them to all personality disorders, and they are so different. So that doesn't, that's not that
Yeah.
informative.
No, and I mean, that's fair. I think this is such a new industry as far as from a business lens. Obviously, we didn't have, above ground legal programs until recently. So we're also trying to figure this out. And then the research, I mean, we've just scratched the surface on some of the research that I think, starting to take place, and sometimes these things take years, but I think it's really exciting, and I hope more and more people, that's my intent in doing this podcast, is trying to just educate folks out there on the different use cases and use scenarios for psilocybin specifically, but psychedelics in general, as an alternate method for, mental health and finding your joy and finding your purpose, all the things. So, yeah, I'm excited to see all the different ways that, this kind of medicine can help people, because I just think there's so many use cases, and this is just another one, right?
Yep.
And we're just starting to learn about where and how it can be effective, and under what setting, and in what space, right? So, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for doing this work. I really appreciate people like you who are willing to dive into, some of these areas that are less mainstream. I think it's really needed.
Yeah. I mean, folks with BPD suffer tremendously. They're the most hospitalized population of the mental health diagnoses. And they just really, because they're so intense and can be difficult, they do kind of get shoved aside. So I want to be that voice, or not the voice, but a voice to help advocate for that. Like we were mentioning, the studies, they're just starting to trickle in a little bit, but for the most part, they've been screened out, just like in our. And that's part of what got me so riled up when I was in school. Like, wow, what? No, it's happening again. It seems to be kind of the stigma is carrying over from the mental health system. And I can't say how many times I've told mental health providers of like, oh yeah, my specialty is BPD. And they're like, ugh. And it's like, what? You are helping professionals and you're giving me that kind of response with this? And I'm seeing it kind of trickle into the psychedelic space. So I am wanting to shout from the rooftops, like, no. This can be a very helpful treatment for folks with this diagnosis too.
Yeah, and hopefully more follow in your footsteps, because I imagine, you can't do it all. So I think the more people out there that hopefully hear this and, get in touch with Jenna if you're interested in learning more, or is this an area that you might want to specialize in. If you are, a therapist or a practicing facilitator, reach out and talk with Jenna, because I'm sure she'd be happy to point you in the right direction and get you started.
I have trainings I offer and consultations, and like I said, the readiness assessment. So yeah, I have all the things.
Yes, and I understand you're going through a little bit of a rebranding right now. So be on the lookout. Anyone out there, she's going through a little rebranding, relaunching her website. And I know she's got some new services and products that she's going to be launching soon. So exciting to see what those are, Jenna.
Yep, I'm excited. I'm excited for all of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge about this topic. I think it's really important. And I know myself, I've learned a lot today. So thank you. And always, everyone, thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, or you know someone who could use this information, please share, like it, leave us a review, subscribe. All of those things help our podcast kind of get off the ground and get into the listening ears of more listeners, which is what we're really aiming to do, is just educate and help people find what they need. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Jenna. And we will talk again next week about another topic. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.